All right. So this is the weak republics. This is the loom that covers the two weak republics. And remember, guys, the two weak republics are Poland and the Dutch Republic. And tomorrow we're going to start talking about England, which is clearly not a weak republic. Actually, after that, we'll talk. Well, I'll talk about that later. All right. So we're looking at the weak republics, and one of the things you should probably be thinking about, my power thinkers are going, I wonder what makes them weak. And you guys already know that they're weak for different reasons. One is going to be about its medieval ties, and the other is going to be about the polarization. So think about those two ideas, and we're going to do this. Now, the painting on the background is one of my favorite places that I've ever been in my entire life. It's outside of Amsterdam, and it's called the Polders. And I will always encourage you, if you ever get to Europe, and I hope you do get to Europe, travel the world, make sure you go to Amsterdam. It's my favorite city, but that's another story. But with that, let's talk about that. All right. So we're going to look at the first thing is, what is a republic? And again, this is a sixth grade term. You guys remember it. But what is a republic? It's a government made up of representatives of the people. And again, that term, the people, is kind of important. Who are the people? And that is the idea of what it will mean. Central authority is held in the hands of a group of people rather than a singular person. So very, very easily, if we're looking at our unit is state, 17th century state building, absolutism, constitutionalism. Well, constitutionalism is the republic, what holds the government together. The republic is the opposite of an absolute monarch. And republics have a variety of appearances. The painting behind you is kind of what the Roman Republic would have looked like. And we shouldn't be surprised that republics began to develop during this time period, because this is the late Renaissance. And what do? We went back to antiquity. So people like the Poles, the Dutch, and the English were thinking about what it looked like. What's the perfect form of government from antiquity? But with that said, I just want to make sure you know what a republic is. All right. Poland. I will tell you, it's a medieval republic. If you jump in a time machine and jump into to 1600 and you visit Poland, A, it's really big and really powerful, right? But B, it's really medieval. Who has too much power? The nobles. And those nobles have what we call Polish liberties. And there are four Polish liberties you need to know. And these are the Polish liberties that ultimately decentralizes Poland, because the nobility absolutely wants no centralization. What were they? Well, the first thing, the nobility, they believed they had the right to elect monarchs. So if the nobles were able to elect a monarch, that would mean no dynasties were formed. And without a dynasty, there was no predictability of who's going to become the next king. And all of the work done by a Polish king would be then undone, because there was no way to inherit that position and power. The elected monarchy denied a dynasty from forming and centralizing. This was one of the Polish liberties held by the nobility. The second thing is the Sejm. The Sejm is the Polish representative body. It only represented nobles. There's no merchants, townspeople, or serfs or peasants. It's only a handful of these guys over here. And you can see these guys. These are Polish soldiers of the 17th century. They look a little different. I just think they look kind of like I would assume that's probably how they met in the Sejm. Who knows? But that's kind of cool. But the Sejm, it's the representative body of Poland that only seats the nobles. So therefore, all the decisions are made by nobles. The Liberian veto, I weigh the last two details, and I'm going to let you think about which one's most important. But for me, the Liberian veto is so significant, because the Liberian veto is part of the Polish liberties that's part of the Sejm. And if a single guy decides he wants to stop a piece of legislation, he can do it. For example, if Poland needs to go to war, and all the nobility begins to think we need to create a national army. One noble can say, wait a minute, if we create a national army, that would create a nation state, which then centralizes, which means I would lose my liberty. Oh, heck no. I pull my Liberian veto. One noble can stop the progress of the entire Poland. Why does he do this? Because he wants to maintain his individual Polish liberties. I think the Liberian veto is at least the most important political idea. But I also want to point out serfdom, where throughout Europe, we began to see in France and England, we're no longer talking about serfs. We're modernizing. We're seeing the rise of the merchants, right? Well, in Poland, in the 16th century and the 17th century, they reestablished serfdom. So therefore, there's only two classes of people. Either you're a noble or a serf. And if you're a serf, you are owned by a noble. And those nobles, they believed it was their liberty to have serfs to provide agricultural service. Those serfs are a medieval slave, and they have zero freedoms, and the nobles dominate them. So therefore, Poland is a weak medieval republic. When I say weak, politically they were relatively powerful, but the centralization was weak. So let me restate that. Poland was a medieval republic that was decentralized, which ultimately would weaken it. Why was it? The Polish liberties included elected monarchy, Sejm, Liberian veto, and serfdom that ultimately uplifted the nobles at the expense of their country. And let's see why that's important. Look here at Poland. Poland is a large, ginormous country. Look at that. It's bigger than Austria. And I guess if you've done your power map, well, you know it's called Poland, Lithuania. That's not a big deal. We're just going to call it Poland. And look at its size. Well, so it's a powerful medieval state. It had the most powerful army at one point, and they actually helped protect the city of Vienna during the 1683 siege. So Poland's not a weak state, but it was a decentralized state. So therefore, it was so decentralized, so weak, that Poland became a power vacuum. And in class, I did pause, but I'm going to tell you, I want to point out the three countries that would have a desire to fill that would be Prussia, because it would geographically centralize it. Austria, of course, always looking to grow. And Russia, who is always looking to move westward. So as we go into the 1700s, I want to point out that Poland is in a position to become a theater of war between 1, 2, 3 countries. And there's nothing Poland can do about it. I'll jump ahead. In 1795, Poland will cease to exist. And we'll see how that plays out. Oh, just a reminder, what's the religion of Poland? I hope you remember. They were Catholic because of the work of the Jesuits. I occasionally will remind you that because at the end of the year, that's going to be really kind of important. But that's Poland. So now let's move to the next one, the Dutch Republic. The Dutch Republic is almost the opposite in so many ways of Poland, where Poland is dominated by the nobles, the Dutch is dominated by the merchants. And from 1581, during their War for Independence, to 1672, historians like myself consider this the Dutch Golden Age. This is absolutely the time. If you ever had an opportunity to travel back in time, this might be where you would want to be, because the Dutch Republic was a phenomenal place to live. The Dutch economic expansion was unfathomable. This was the time of the Dutch East India Company, the Bank of Amsterdam, the Amsterdam Bourse or the Exchange, and they became the most dominant economy in all Europe and in the world. And think about how small they are. And a little bit later, we'll see a map if you need to, but it is really a small region. But they had such a vast wealth that they are able to fund the Golden Age. What we see here, Dutch realism, this is a piece. Dutch realism was the new cool artistic style. And the most famous artist was a guy named Rembrandt. I've seen his birthplace. It's kind of cool. But again, this piece is called The Night Watch. I had the privilege of being in Amsterdam 2 summers ago, and they were actually cleaning this piece. If we ever get back in class, I'll probably show you some photographs. It was legit. But with that, I just want to point out they were so wealthy that during the Dutch Golden Age, they had their own artistic style that became like the cool thing of Europe. And Rembrandt is the key artist. Night Watches is his most famous piece. The Dutch culture was the envy of Europe. If you've done your power map, you know about the flutes, which were those big ships, flat bottom ships. You know about the urban expansion I'm going to talk about. You know about the cool things that the Dutch had. Go back to your power map if you need to. But with that, I just want to point out, boom, if you become the envy of Europe, what happens? The balance of power shifts against you. But with that, I do want to point out a really important thing. Urban expansion of the 17th century. This map, this is water. That is water. This is a peninsula. Here's Amsterdam. These walls are called dikes. If you don't remember, sometimes we call the Netherlands the Low Countries because they're below sea level. And they would have to put these dikes to hold back the ocean waters or the bay waters. And then if you look here, this is the canal infrastructure. My hotel was right there. Really kind of a cool place. But during the 17th century, we're going to find out there was immigration going on from the Spanish Netherlands. So a lot of people were moving in this area, and even some English people were moved because of all of the economic opportunities. So Amsterdam became overcrowded. They didn't have enough resources. The problem is they couldn't move to the east because of Prussia. They couldn't move to the west because of France. So they didn't know what to do. So over the next 50 years, they actually physically expanded their geography. And this is what we call, by 1663, they had this thing called the Agricultural Revolution, and they create polders. Polders is what I want you to know. Polders. These two maps are drawn at the same scale. And you can see that from the peninsula. Up here you see a canal. But I want you to look at this part of the map. Look at that. This is water and this is farmland. What happened was they extended this wall. Oops. They extended this wall. Then they filled it up with land. They used their windmills to pump out the water, and they turned water into land. So a polder is reclaimed land from the oceans. And they're unique, that I know of, they're unique to the Netherlands. And this is an example. Because they needed more room to live and farm, they reclaimed land by extending their dikes, using their windmills to pump out the water, and then that is the area that we call polders. I just think it's cool. That's because of capitalism, because the merchants saw a need and they met the need. So I want to point out that the Dutch are kind of cool. Despite all the cool things about the Dutch, remember there were 7 different provinces. So in some ways they become like if you think of Italy, but the polarization. There's 2 groups. The Republicans supported the States General. They wanted to decentralize the monarch's power. Okay? And if they're looking to make changes, that means they're over here to the left. So their Republicans are very different than our Republicans, of course. But they're Republicans who wanted to decentralize using the States General, wanted to make changes. Which social class do you think the Republicans were? Of course they're the burghers. Because what economic system do they want? Of course, capitalism. So the Republicans wanted to decentralize the monarchy so that they would have more freedom. Well, on the flip side, you have the stadtholders. And the stadtholders were the military governors of the different provinces, and they supported the monarchy of William of Orange. They wanted William of Orange to become an absolute king so that he can centralize and stabilize the power. So since they want to go all the way to a very conservative government, they're over here. So this is polarization. One extreme is absolutism. The other extreme was republicanism. There is no compromise. So this means they're eventually either going to have a civil war or at least turn into a power vacuum. And unfortunately, at the same exact time was when something bad happens. So by the mid-17th century, the Republicans became polarized as the Republicans and stadtholders competed for power. And the outcome wasn't quite a civil war. It literally was a major war. Both the English and the French sought to reduce the power of the Dutch. The English wanted to get economically involved, destroy the Dutch Empire so that the English could expand. Remember, this is the time they're colonizing India and New England. Ever heard of New Amsterdam? That's in New York. We talked a little bit about that before. The French were looking to expand their geography, and they blamed the Dutch for a lot of things, and we'll see that at the end of our unit. By 1672 to 1713, we have a series of wars that's going to finalize our unit, right? And they're called the Wars of Louis XIV. From 1672 to 1713, there's a Dutch war with England, Wars of Louis XIV. So the Dutch are trying to fight a navy war, a maritime war. They're trying to fight an army war. They don't have the population. England is a large country. France is the largest country in Europe. What do you think happens? The Dutch becomes imperially and militarily overextended, and they were about to collapse. So by 1713, with the Peace of Utrecht, this is the third time in this unit we've talked about the Peace of Utrecht, the Dutch decided they were better lovers than fighters. So they decided to be neutral. And from here on out, the Dutch will no longer get involved in war. They will not try to expand their empire. And what they decided to do is remain the economic center of Northern Europe. So who's better off, Poland or the Dutch Republic? I hope you realize clearly the Dutch Republic, because today the Dutch Republic is or we call the Netherlands, is one of the most important country in Europe still. They still have the economics because they decided they would rather be neutral in war than expand their military. And that is the end of our class. I hope that makes sense. If you have questions, I will definitely fill them. It's going to take me a second.